The Denver Broncos are bringing back inside linebacker Justin Strnad, who is anticipated to compete with Alex Singleton for a starting job. How does this move the needle for the Denver Broncos defense? We'll tell you about that and much more here on today's episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Broncos Country, what's happening? You know what time it is. It's time for another episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, where you know it is your team every day for all your Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more. This is the place to be. Thank you so much to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thank you so much for tuning in, making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. And if you're not yet an everydayer, make sure you become one by hitting that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on a brand new episode of the show every single day, all year long, including throughout the entire offseason. Because for the true fan, there is never an offseason. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, site expert over there, predominantlyorange.com. And as NFL free agency continues on, here's what you can expect on today's episode of the show. With a fire sale apparently going on with the San Francisco 49ers, should the Broncos call them up and inquire maybe about Christian McCaffrey? We'll debate and discuss whether or not would be a move for the Broncos to maybe entertain here. We're going to talk about new addition Trent Sherfield, what he's going to bring to the Broncos on the special team side of the ball, and what type of underrated impact he might be able to have on offense at wide receiver. We're going to kick things off here with the news of the day. The Broncos bringing back Justin Strnad on a one-year deal worth $2.7 million guaranteed, and he's going to come in and he's going to compete for a starting job, according to what the Broncos told him. So, Sayre, let's open it up here, because the Broncos, more recently, they go out and they get Dre Greenlaw, and they give him a 3-year deal. Pretty good money right there that almost ensures he's going to be a starter here. But then they bring back Justin Strnad here. We know Alex Singleton's coming off the ACL, but Strnad told our good friend Mike Kliss that the Broncos told him he's going to come in and he's going to compete for a starting job, and kind of opens the door here for some inside linebacker competition. And more importantly, probably indicating that Alex Singleton's job is not secure just yet.
Which kind of makes me wonder if we need to be on watch here, or if that's going to be something that maybe, back or forwards in training camp, closer to that point in time, roster cuts, things like that, because obviously Justin Strnad had a bit of a breakout year in 2024, at least statistically, Cody. I mean, 73 total tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, 4 quarterback hits, 3 passes defensed, and made a number of big plays. I think when you talk about big splash plays at the linebacker position last year, Justin Strnad was that guy for the Broncos. I know Cody Barton had a couple of big, returns for, touchdown or whatever like that, but Justin Strnad was the guy that I thought was the best at attacking the line of scrimmage. He was the guy that I thought was the best at, being aggressive and filling those gaps. But obviously that became an issue as the season went along. And I think the Broncos even benched Strnad at one point after putting him into the lineup when they were kind of reshuffling things post Alex Singleton injury. I'm interested to see exactly what it looks like with this competition in training camp. Is it going to be a situation to where Strnad is like actually rotating in with the ones, or is it going to be hey, we know what you can do. We're going to see how Singleton's health is. And if it's not good, like, it's going to be Strnad. Is the competition a 3-way competition with Drew Sanders as well? Because we know Dre Greenlaw is going to be in the starting lineup for Denver. At the very least, we know that Strnad brings special teams ability, over 1,200 special teams snaps in 4 seasons for the Broncos, Cody. So feels like this move kind of made sense, especially at the price tag of just $2.7 million.
Yeah, and look, his 6th season in the NFL. And look, I'm going to be the firm. I might be the only one on this board. And there's some things I know that a lot of people don't have knowledge on behind the scenes here. But I felt like Justin Strnad was not as bad as like Twitter will tell you he is. Like, there's a bunch of people like, oh, I don't want Strnad back on the team. But Strnad played really well for a large portion of the season at inside linebacker. I think where people are getting things convoluted a little bit here, you're looking at the game against the Los Angeles Chargers, where once again, I want to remind folks, people are going to see a player near where a ball is caught, and like, oh my gosh, he got burnt. Da, 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 da. But the reality of the situation is, like, you got to know what you're looking at from the scheme. Okay, so case in point, the Broncos, and you and I have talked about this, Sayre, the Broncos deployed a lot of inside linebacker blitzes quite a bit. there were more communication issues at inside linebacker, in my opinion, where Cody Barton was and behind where Brandon Jones was, between those two guys, more so than there was Justin Strnad. So there was one play against the Chargers where Jaquan McMillan is blitzing from the nickel, right? So when you're blitzing, you have to replace in coverage. Well, you have a too high shell and your two safeties are playing over the top here. So Justin Strnad has to read run first, but because Jaquan McMillan is blitzing, he reads pass. Now he's got to be at the inside linebacker spot. He's got to get out to the curl to flat there. And, Justin Herbert would get the ball out of his hands quickly. That's not necessarily like, oh my gosh, Justin Strnad, couldn't make a play. It's, hey, the Broncos defense didn't put him or anybody else in a great position for that matter here. The Broncos, I can tell you, are very high on Strnad. They love what he brings to the table from what you mentioned as a core 4 special teams ace, in which he didn't get to play special teams last year because he had to step in and start. So you would rely on younger guys like, at one point of the season, it was Christian Welch. Then, Lavelle Bailey started getting some special team snaps. Drew Sanders got special team snaps when he came back from his injury. Now, you bring him in back on a 1-year deal. He's proven he can be a valuable backup for you. He's also proven he can start for you if need be, if there's an injury, but he's a key special teams guy that Darren Rizzi obviously will love and value on that side of the ball here. So for me, I look at it, Sayre, as a 3-way competition. I think unless Alex Singleton is surprisingly, which at this point, if he got released now and that freed up cap space for the Broncos, I would be surprised because I imagine that type of move would have came a little bit earlier as they were getting ready for free agency. So I'm not expecting that to happen. Things can change, obviously, as we're sitting here recording this episode, but I think it's going to be Justin Strnad coming in to compete with Drew Sanders and with Alex Singleton for that starting job at middle linebacker, whereas Dre Greenlaw is going to be that guy who can spy your quarterback, spy a running back out of the backfield. He's going to be your coverage guy that we saw him do, obviously, over there at San Francisco. That, to me, is exciting because when you blitz Strnad now, or Alex Singleton, whoever the inside linebacker is going to be, you have a guy who is going to sit back there and can cover the middle of the field. That, to me, is the most exciting part about the addition of Dre Greenlaw and maybe how this linebacker room is now shaping out here for the Broncos defensively.
And what could be really interesting, too, is the fact that Strnad hasn't started consecutive years since he was back at Wake Forest. So maybe there's something to that of getting a little bit of continuity there. Obviously, the experience that he got this past season is invaluable for the Broncos. And for him to take up less than 1% of the salary cap at $2.7 million, I mean, it's a really great value. And I want to keep on bringing those kinds of numbers up because I think it's important to note that, like, a player of Strnad's caliber who brings so much to the table on special teams and potentially a starter on defense, taking up less than 1% of your salary cap. It's pretty awesome deal for the Denver Broncos and just good business in general, because remember, it would have been so easy for George Paton to come in and clean house and get rid of all the guys who are drafted by John Elway or drafted to different coaching schemes and things like that. But the pro scouting department is not playing any favorites, which I think is really important. I think for a guy like Strnad to be one of the only holdovers from the John Elway era, there's not many left in Denver at this point. It speaks to his work ethic. It speaks to his fit in the locker room. It speaks to the fact that we know Darren Rizzi is also part of the personnel evaluation at this point. So if Rizzi is watching Strnad play special teams and he's like, I want that guy back, I mean, that should speak volumes to the members of Broncos country, like you said, Cody, who are saying, I don't really want Strnad back. I mean, folks, sometimes the grass ain't greener on the other side of the fence. Sometimes the grass is greener where you water it, right? I mean, there's a time to turn the page and there's a time to move on from guys. But somebody like Strnad is, when you're assembling a 53-man roster, somebody like that is a guy that you can really rely on to do a lot of different things for you and raise the floor. Once again, I'm going to say it every episode, probably this offseason, raise the floor of an important position defensively.
There's a reason he's made it through multiple coaching staffs, multiple defensive coordinators at this point, and it's because of his ability to be available, but also to play and have an impact, and not just on defense when you need him to. And look, I think he had several big plays on defense. He's had some sacks. Obviously, you mentioned the 3 sacks he had, but there were some times throughout a handful of games last year where it's a key rundown for, the Broncos defense to get off the field. And he comes up with the big stuff, or a TFL there. Like, that is the type of stuff that you need. And look, would you rather, Sayre, the Broncos go and spend, You got $13 million a year, essentially, I think, for Dre Greenlaw, or 11.6. So would you like them to go add another linebacker to go spend maybe 14, 15 million? No. Like, if you got guys that you know that can play and you're already paying someone a pretty good amount of money, it's like, hey, let's continue to get the best players possible, because it is almost impossible to build out an 11-man defense where every player on your defense is highly paid at what they do. That is hard. And so that's where you have to come up with, as you mentioned, we're going to use a Walmart pun here, great value signings. Justin Strnad, in my opinion, is that here. Sayre and Broncos Country, we want to hear from you on today's episode of the show, your thoughts on Strnad returning. And if there was a competition between he, Alex Singleton, and Drew Sanders, how do you think that one will go? But the Broncos, they weren't done boosting the special teams side of the ball. They went out and they added a veteran special teams ace and someone who might be able to have an under-the-radar impact at wide receiver. We'll talk about what Trent Sherfield brings to the table for the Broncos here on today's episode of the show. Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? I do that all the time. Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, all of your investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Some things that I liked when I found out when I started using Monarch Money, I realized how much money I was spending on food delivery services or eating out. But now I can budget and I can be smarter and save more because of the insights that Monarch Money provides inside of their app. And instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances. You can track your spending and even plan your long-term financial goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code Locked On NFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code Locked On NFL for half off your first year. Monarchmoney.com.
Would you believe me if I told you the Denver Broncos signed another guy who used to play for the San Francisco 49ers? Well, Broncos Country, believe it or not, they've brought in another former 49er, actually a guy who's been a little bit of a journeyman in his NFL career, Trent Sherfield, who is going to come in as a wide receiver special teams ace for this Denver Broncos team. He'll be replacing a guy we talked about on yesterday's episode of the show, Tremont Smith. But what does he bring to the table that Tremont Smith does not or did not for the Denver Broncos? We're going to talk about that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. And shout out to all of you who make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. If you're not already an everyday listener of the show, take a couple seconds, hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts as well as on YouTube so you don't miss a single episode of the show. Cody, let's talk about the Trent Sherfield signing for the Denver Broncos. A reported deal of 2 years, $6 million with the potential to go up to $8 million. I find this move to be interesting. I think a lot of Broncos country was upset, if not, just borderline toxic when the signing was reported, because obviously that this is not the level of wide receiver move that everybody's hoping for at this point. But this is not a move where Mike Kliss, remember, he reported that the Broncos are going to assign a wide receiver of note. Kliss was adamant after the signing of Trent Sherfield that this is not the wide receiver of note signing that the team is potentially going to make.
Yeah, he mentioned something. I think the comparison was, the Sherfield signing is more about Tremont Smith's replacement than it is like a Josh Reynolds signing from last year. And I think there's a lot of validity to that, right? Because think about this in terms of what Denver's looking at. Okay, you lose Tremont Smith, who is a core 4 special teams ace for you, right? Core 4 meaning, hey, you play gunner on kickoff, you play gunner on punt, you're also a jammer, and you have an important role in, special teams on extra point, field goal, whatever it may be. You have a key role, and obviously in the return game, Tremont Smith was the backup returner. Sherfield, I do not believe, Sayre, is anticipated to be a return option here for the Broncos, though in training camp he might be able to catch a few returns because you're going to have all your skill guys back there during the time where the fans are sitting and cooking on the hill there, where you're just going to catch and fill it. He's got one kick return in his entire NFL career that came back in 2019 against the Arizona Cardinals. So where can he have the biggest impact here? Well, you mentioned it. I think as a gunner on punt team, I think as a potential jammer, kickoff, these are where he can have probably the biggest impact. There was a game last year where he was a member of the Minnesota Vikings where they were playing the Tennessee Titans. And you can go through and look and find different clips. I'll do a film breakdown of Sherfield on Mile High Sports, where Sherfield is, as a gunner, runs downfield against the Tennessee Titans, makes a tremendous play where he secures the ball on the 1 yard line. That's something that Tremon Smith did a lot of last season. So this move right here for Denver, the biggest priority for it is special teams. I think when you look at the salary, special teams. Now, what does it mean potentially at wide receiver? This isn't, as you mentioned, the wide receiver of note. This isn't a big splash. And this is more so like, I think, a worst case scenario. Hey, you've got a guy who I think can be under the radar for you as a potential receiver, but he's not going to be your primary guy. I think when you look at his overall body of work, his most productive season that he had in terms of receiving, I think came a couple of years ago. But primarily last year as a member of the Minnesota Vikings, he hauled in 8 passes on 9 targets for 83 yards and 1 touchdown in just 17 games last season, right? So that's not saying, hey, you are a high volume, high target guy. This is a guy that might get some playing time if you have an injury at the position, but primarily it's a depth option for you, mainly special teams, which you need guys just like that to take up a roster spot. And Sherfield, I think when you look at his body of work on special teams, he's a hard worker. He's finally embraced it. I saw an interview he did a couple of years ago where he talked about he would love to showcase what he could do at wide receiver, but teams view him as a special teams ace. And he said, so I've embraced that. And I work hard. I just put my head down and grind. He is a workaholic when it comes to special teams. And once again, you're getting Darren Rizzi, the new special teams coordinator, a guy who has an opportunity to make impact plays for you, maybe flip field position for you, down it inside the 5 yard line or at the 1 yard line like he has shown, and a guy who can tackle, which is very important.
Yeah, and he's somebody who, like you mentioned, he likes doing the dirty work on special teams, and he doesn't mind, not getting recognized for that. I mean, he's compensated quite well for that. A couple of years ago, he did play over 600 snaps offensively for Mike McDaniel and the Miami Dolphins after coming over from the 49ers. Remember, I mentioned that little nugget there. What I think this move represents, Cody, is a replacement of Tremon Smith, but also potentially a replacement of Lil Jordan Humphrey, because Lil Jordan Humphrey was that guy who did kind of the dirty work for the Broncos at receiver, a little bit of blocking. Trent Sherfield has some clips out there of him blocking at the wide receiver position, even cracking down on an edge player in a clip that I saw from just last season with Minnesota. So he's being trusted with the more physical aspect of the position, and then being efficient. I guess 8 of 9, targets that he caught for 80 some yards and a touchdown. So when needed, he could maybe contribute offensively, which is the big differentiator between he and somebody like Tremon Smith, who he ain't contributing to the defense. He was special teams only. So this is a guy who can actually play for your offense. And if you look at the Broncos depth chart now at wide receiver, you've got Courtland Sutton, Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin, Devon Vele, and Trent Sherfield. I would venture to guess, Cody, that those 5 guys are probably locks to be on the roster, which means that there could be room for, wiggle room for one more guy to sneak his way onto the team. And I think that's an interesting thing as well, is because last year, one of the 53-man spots at corner was being taken up. This year, it's wide receiver. Lil Jordan Humphrey, he was not a special teams guy. So that is another factor here to where you might be getting 2 guys replaced in one player on the roster, and to do things that neither of those guys could do.
Yeah, we'll see how it all pans out here. I mean, like I said, I think Broncos Country's reaction was, what? This is the wide receiver that they're signing? Like this, they didn't sign this guy for Bo Nix. And look, well, obviously Bo Nix will have to develop some chemistry with him, throughout training camp, because he's going to be on the roster. He's going to be at the position. I imagine we'll probably see Sherfield play a lot in the preseason with some of the second team, third team offenses, but primarily their goal and their vision for him is on special teams, and a guy who can come in and maybe have an impact, solid blocker, embraces it as well. And I think gives you a little more upside overall, because as you mentioned with those 2 players in Tremon Smith, who obviously had a huge impact, and Lil Jordan Humphrey, essentially you're bringing in one guy to replace maybe the anticipatory role of two of those players, which gives you, I think, flexibility on how you manage your roster. And maybe you have an additional player at another position because it affords the opportunity to secure a roster spot here for a guy like Sherfield. So Broncos country, don't hang your head. Wide receiver moves. There's still an opportunity for the Broncos to make a move here at wide receiver in NFL free agency as all things go on. And obviously, if you know that happens, you're going to get an episode here on Locked On Broncos, whether it's a new episode or a breaking news one. We expect the Broncos to still add a wide receiver of note here this offseason. Let us know your thoughts on the addition of Trent Sherfield. If you've had a chance to check out his tape and some of the plays he's made on special teams, what was your initial takeaway here? But we're not done, Broncos country. We got one final topic coming up on today's episode of the show with a fire sale that's going on in San Francisco with the 49ers. Should the Denver Broncos pick up the phone and inquire about Colorado's own Christian McCaffrey? Sayre Bedinger, myself, we're going to discuss this here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel. And as you all know, FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and the month of March is a good one. Not only is March my birthday, NFL free agency, but it is also time for March Madness, one of the biggest events in the sports world all year long. And March Madness is finally here, and FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action from some of the biggest Cinderella stories, the biggest upsets in the tournament, and eventually all of those who are going to be cutting down the tournament nets at the end of it. FanDuel lets you get in on the action for college hoops. And right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Once again, you sign up today as a new customer, you place $5 on it, and it wins. You're going to get $200 in bonus bets that you can use on March Madness to predict the winners of the tournament or winners of games. And you can turn them all into a parlay, a same game parlay, or you can even do a multi-leg parlay as well. Pick your favorites, staying on the action with FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com today and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Should the Denver Broncos pick up the phone and call the 49ers to inquire about a potential trade here for Christian McCaffrey with a potential fire sale going on in San Francisco? They're no longer the 49ers. They're the 49er with all the guys that they've had to get rid of. Stealing that from someone. I saw that on social media, Sayre. And I want to say thank you so much to everyone in Broncos country for tuning in, making us your first listen. This is a debated discussion for sure. I think you and I are going to differ on this. I don't know your thoughts on it, but I know I probably am going to feel a little different about this than you. So I'm going to ask you the question since you posed it here. Should the Broncos look into a trade for Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers?
I'm going to say yes. Look into the trade for Christian McCaffrey, depending on the price. Obviously, if I'm the Denver Broncos, I'm not giving up any of my picks in rounds 1, 2, or 3 for anybody that's still available. But I think day 3 picks, you can negotiate, pick swaps, negotiate. Christian McCaffrey obviously is one of the premier running backs in the NFL when healthy. Now, the when healthy tag with him is a little bit more of a pronounced thing because he has had so many injuries throughout the course of his career, including one last year where, he was going to like Germany for treatment, things like that. So if the 49ers are having a fire sale, Cody, I'd be definitely calling about this if I'm the Denver Broncos. And my tinfoil hat theory is this, and this has maybe no bearing on anything whatsoever, but I know for a fact that grandparents need to be around their grandkids. They love it more than parents love being around their kids. And I know for a fact that Christian McCaffrey is expecting a child this year, and also that his parents live in Colorado. And so, Christian McCaffrey, if it was my mom, his mom would be calling him up and being like, hey, I don't know what you got to do. I need to be around this baby. And yeah, she could fly to California, things like that. But you know what? Get the guy back to his home state of Colorado. Let him be that legacy player that we've always dreamed about. I think this would be a little more fan service than anything, Cody, but I don't hate the idea of throwing a dart at Christian McCaffrey, given what he's proven in the past.
Yeah, I understand that. I don't think it would be a good move for Denver just because you really don't know where he's at on the medical side. And look, I would say maybe the appeal to Christian McCaffrey, if healthy, as you mentioned, very explosive, not only as a runner, but a pass catcher out of the backfield. And to be fair, he does meet the requirement and the criteria for what Sean Payton would designate as a joker. But at the same time, with what we've seen from the running back position, because of his size, and look, for him to be able to play as long as he has in the NFL, that has been a huge accomplishment, because really in college, a lot of people are saying, well, he's never going to make it, in the NFL because he's going to take too many hits. I think he's proven that he can actually take some of those hits and he can be a game changer. It's really the soft tissue injuries. So if there was a reason, if there was some way that the Broncos could make those issues go with what Bo Lowry's been able to do, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to it. I just don't see that being what the Broncos want to do. And in your opinion, for a guy like McCaffrey, Sayre, what do you think his asking price would be in terms of via trade? What would the 49ers be looking to get? I mean, obviously the Broncos and the Niners, they've done business in the past before here. Obviously, they sent Randy Gregory to San Francisco when he was a member of the Denver Broncos. And so the relationship is there. You're plucking Talanoa Hufanga and Dre Greenlaw away from it. You have the 49ers connection there with those two guys you bring in free agency. Obviously, Ed McCaffrey's on social media posting his excitement about some of these 49ers that are coming to Denver, and you can't help but wonder, okay, hey, has he said like, hey, Christian, you want to come here as well? I see the appeal for it. Is it going to move the needle for the Broncos, though? I'm not sure it does. Then again, I could be wrong. I'm curious for your rebuttal on it.
Yeah, I think as far as bringing in a veteran running back, me, Cody, all offseason, I've been saying kind of opposed to the idea of veteran running backs, given this rookie class that's incoming. I think a player like Christian McCaffrey would cause me to change my tune just a little bit, even if it's just on paper. And then you say he's one of the very few guys that I would say I'd rather have him and a rookie than just drafting two guys. I'd rather take that risk on him. Like you mentioned, he's kind of the definition of that joker role for the offense. And I think even if you would get 10 games out of it next year and maybe the playoffs, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's a risk that's maybe worth taking. So what's the asking price? I don't know that, because I mean, how much money are you taking on from the 49ers? Are they just trying to get him to a new situation? Do they want to trade him in the first place? Like, remember the 49ers traded second, third, fourth round picks to get Christian McCaffrey, and it led them far, but they've been also they re-signed, I think, Jordan Mason this offseason. Yep. Cody, there's rumors. They have the kid from Louisville, Garendo, who's on the roster. Sounds like they might be trying to bring in Raheem Mostert back to the fold. So there is a chance that he gets traded. And if that's the case, then why not, take a shot on this if you're Denver? But I'm kind of more on the lines right now. What's more pressing or what's more immediately available is the guy, Kyle Juszczyk, the perennial all-pro fullback, Cody. Mike Burton is a free agent, and obviously Burton is a different type of guy. He plays a lot of special teams. Juszczyk doesn't play a lot of special teams anymore. What are your thoughts on Juszczyk coming to Denver? Do you think he's a type of player that they would identify? He would take up a 53-man spot. He would be a game day active, but he wouldn't necessarily play special teams. What's your take on that guy?
I mean, I like Juszczyk a lot. And look, I think Broncos players' wives would really love the addition of him because of the fact that, his wife makes a lot of really awesome NFL style clothing. I don't see that happening just because, like what you mentioned, like I think he could obviously impact the Broncos. You could hand him the ball from time to time. You can also use him as a receiver from time to time. He's been very capable as a former Pro Bowl and All-Pro in that category here. But from what you mentioned, if he's not going to play special teams, I don't see that being the benefit. Whereas you have a guy like Nate Atkins, who I think will probably play a little bit more of that hybrid H-back role for Denver. And Nate Atkins plays special teams. He embraces it as a core four guy and, can impact you. He can have a little bit of an under-the-radar impact in the passing game, but he's going to be a blocker for you. He might even be at the tight end position, one of Denver's better, I would say, inline pass blockers there alongside Adam Troutman. I know tight end's a big area of focus here for the Broncos and maybe where they need to go or what they're looking to get. I don't know if Juszczyk would come in and give them what they need if he is not able to play or does not at this point of his career play special teams. As nice as the name value would be, I don't see that happening. But I'd also maybe even ask you this question as well, kind of circling back to Christian McCaffrey. Okay, if the Broncos were to have interest in him, you already have Blake Watson, you have Audric Estime, Jaleel McLaughlin on this roster, Sayre Bedinger. Does that eliminate you, in your opinion, from going out there maybe in the NFL draft and getting, one of these guys in this, what we believe is to be a deep class here in the first 3 rounds of the draft?
I think it would more so affect the guys that are already on the team, like McLaughlin and Bidet and potentially even Watson as well. I don't know that Estime's situation is worth monitoring just yet, but I mean, I think he needs to have a big training camp and preseason as well, as a 5th round pick last year. So I do believe that the Broncos have to, they can't hold too much sentimental value towards certain guys. The vision has to be clear for the player and saying, hey, we really believe that, Jaleel can be a, potentially 1,000-yard from scrimmage type of player in order to pass on other guys that become available, right? That has to be the conviction of the front office, to pass on really good players that become available. Otherwise, you're getting stuck in this mud of Sean Payton has his guys and well, Jaleel shows up to the facility before everybody else. And while that is an admirable trait, and I think it's essential for guys who want to make it in the NFL, given his kind of a story, there comes a point, I think, to where you might have to upgrade the talent level of the team and take some risks. And so the conviction would have to be such that, hey, we believe he can truly be 1,000-yard from scrimmage guy. And so we're not going to go after the veteran McCaffrey, or we're not going to go after, whatever XYZ. But that's why we didn't sign Aaron Jones. That's why we didn't sign Najee Harris. That type of thing has to be your conviction in the front office. If you're saying, hey, we're not going to go after somebody like McCaffrey because of the guys we already have.
I'm very curious to see what the Broncos ultimately decide to do at this position. And we'll see if McCaffrey does become available. I imagine a handful of other teams will call and say, hey, what's the price? Or teams have already done that at this point. I mean, that's a common practice around this time of the year. But Broncos country, what do you think should happen? Should the Broncos pick up the phone and say, hey, John Lynch, what's it going to take to get Christian McCaffrey? Let us know your thoughts here on today's episode of Locked On Broncos, wherever you get your podcast. For all you everydayers out there, we appreciate you so much for tuning in, making us your first listen. If you're not yet an everydayer, become one so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team, including breaking news, episodes when a big-time signing happens. You get all your Broncos coverage as to what you need to know what's going on with the team right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The NFL free agency push continues, and the Broncos salary cap picture becomes a little bit clearer. After the moves that they've made, what does their salary cap space initially look like? And we didn't even get a chance to talk about the coaching positional changes, promotions that have gone on with this team. We'll highlight that much more, plus some other free agency stuff on tomorrow's episode, Locked On Broncos.